On this episode, we hear from a longtime educator about the changing role of teachers in Thailand.
So if you've ever wanted to be a teacher or just wanted to know how this iconic role has changed over the past few decades, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krap, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 to spread the gospel of rock and roll, but got sidetracked by the gospel of Mawlam music and have been rocking the can ever since.
That's not really true, but it is funny. It's a funny thought. And I am Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 21 years ago, fell in love with the elephant roaming the streets of Bangkok until I realized that was a horrible thing. But I stayed anyway.
That is a good one. It's
remember that? I remember my first impression was, oh, it's so cool. Like there's elephants on the street.
And then one day you're like, oh no, that's bad.
That's right. I don't know. I don't remember how long it took me to figure it out, but hopefully it didn't take me a long time. Yeah. But I remember at first I just thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Right. It's like now when you have some friends who are like, let's go to one of those shows where you can ride dolphins. You're like, nah, we don't do that anymore. That's not good.
Yeah, sorry. All right, we want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, access to our Discord server to chat with me, Greg, and other listeners, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and Bangkok topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about PayPal's decision to severely restrict how accounts based in Thailand can be used, the recent Supreme Court decision regarding anti-government protests that will probably not fade away anytime soon, and more details on Thailand's reopening, including stats on visitors. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
You know, we say there's nothing we love more than stats.
No doubt.
Cold, hard stats.
We are data people for sure.
All right. On this episode, we chat with a fellow by the name of David Percy. Now, David's been an educator in Thailand for the past 20-odd years, working both with students and administrators to help educate young minds all over the region. And we've had a few listeners over the past write in asking us about this topic, so we thought we'd get David on to talk about how the role of foreign English teacher, that's with a capital F, capital E, and capital T, has changed in Thailand and Asia over the years. Have things gotten better or worse? Do foreign teachers get the respect they used to? Can teaching in Thailand be a legit career choice? Etc., etc. So here is all the nitty-gritty in my conversation with David Percy. Well, I'm happy to introduce my brand new friend, David Percy. We just met online. We haven't met in real life yet, but I hope we will. Now, David, I asked you to come on the show because a friend of a friend said that you might be a good guy to talk to about this. And we've gotten a couple of emails from listeners over the past, long while actually, about being a teacher / educator in Thailand and the wider Asia. And it's something that I'm sort of familiar with because I used to be a quote unquote teacher. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But you are an actual real teacher and you've been here a long time. And I'm really curious about how the role of the Farang teacher in Thailand and maybe other parts in Asia has evolved over the past couple of decades.
I actually came over as a senior teacher. So I came over to manage, it was a school that was moving to one of the international chains. So they needed somebody to oversee the academic side of things. And then I moved from that. I became the head of the adult courses at the British Council. So I was there for 6 years. And that, obviously I did some teaching there. But as you know, you're kind of in a bubble. If you're teaching ELT and in certain places, you only see a certain side of education in Thailand. And then I moved to work for a publisher doing teacher training and consultancy all over Asia. So that I think that's why I might have been recommended to you for the show, just because I would have seen a little bit of how things work in other countries as well.
Right.
I'm sure other people know a lot more about different aspects of education in Thailand, but I've probably seen a sort of overview, if you like.
I see. Okay, so you've got a pretty broad experience of the whole sort of the industry from many different angles.
Mm-hmm.
So I think before we start, though, before we really get into it, I think it's important to differentiate. I mean, when I say I was a teacher, I was basically a foreigner who spoke English. I don't have a teaching degree. I don't have any real qualifications. So I hesitate to call myself a teacher. I think I was hired so that the parents of my students could say that a Farang teaches my daughter.
It doesn't make you a bad teacher, Greg.
Not necessarily, no, but it does make a difference in terms of the paycheck.
Yeah, it certainly does. And as you I think when we were talking about this before, it might make a difference to people's respect on certain levels. But I'd say, good teachers are in a sense, you're a good teacher independent of the qualifications that you have. You can learn certain things on the job.
Interesting. Okay.
But, Farang teachers, really they're employed, I would say, for two reasons. I mean, first of all, they do offer something different to Thai teachers. Maybe, I think when you're living in a different country, you're not constrained by your culture or the local culture as Thai teachers are. And of course, there is a shortage of Thai teachers who actually have a good command of the English language. And then the other thing is, of course, the sort of face value. Having sort of foreign teachers in the school can look good, to parents and who
right.
They might hold great stall on that.
Yeah, it's a kind of a prestige thing. And that's definitely, I think, why I was hired and my coworkers were hired, because we weren't making very much money, and everyone was sort of on the same page, like you get what you pay for, right? These guys aren't qualified. They're not, master's degree holders in education or anything, but I think we did a pretty good job and made classes fun, and maybe that's all they were looking for. So then let's dive into this sort of the wider issue. You've been here a long time. So in your view, how has the role of the foreign teacher changed in Asia over the past few decades?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure that the role of the foreign teacher has changed. I think they're still employed for the same reasons. There's a couple of things that have changed, and they're sort of tangential to this. So I think one thing is that there are fewer young expats. So the actual type of teacher who is employed is going to be different. Secondly, there are probably fewer opportunities in face-to-face English language teaching, and on the other hand, there may be more opportunities in Thai schools for teachers to come over, and of course there are a lot of international schools. So I think I read somewhere that the average age of expats in Thailand has gone up 10 years in the space of the last 3 or 4 years. So it's and that's got something to do with a lot of people leaving, and the people that are left, like you and me, we're stuck. We might not want to leave, but for various reasons, it's difficult if we wanted to.
Well, I sure feel like I've aged 10 years in the past 3 or 4 years. So
yeah, well, you look like you've aged 10 years, but yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, one thing that I noticed has changed is when I first came over here in 2001, it was kind of like, oh, go to Asia, just be a teacher, and you'll have a great time and a great life. And back then, I think it was even still a little bit like you could show up and say, I speak English, and they would go, oh, great. Now, I think that if you show up to a place and you say, I speak English, they'll say, well, everyone speaks English. What else do you have? Is that an accurate sort of representation of things on the
Yes,
ground?
I think to some extent things have tightened up. It's partly because of technology, so they can check whether your qualifications come from Khao San Road or whether they're actually,
Right.
the real McCoy. So it's changed to some degree. Having said that, it's as you know, education policy in Thailand tends to be quite reactive. So I'm not so much talking about ELT, but in language teaching in schools. It tends to be quite reactive. So every time there is some survey that shows that Thailand has fallen even further behind on international measures of language proficiency, the government thinks, right, well, we've got two options here. Either we can train teachers long term and resolve the problem, or we take the short term solution, which is just get more foreigners into schools. And so, the requirements tend to change quite regularly, I think, depending on, what the demand is.
So I've been reading over the past little while, every once in a while, Phil, who used to run the Ajan.com website, he posts interviews on Ajan.com with teachers here and there. And there's some debate recently about whether coming to Thailand as a teacher is a legit career opportunity, or if it's just sort of a stopgap between going back home and finding a quote unquote real job. Do you think that Thailand provides provides a good step, a good career step for people who want to be educators?
I'd say so. I think you have to distinguish between different types of institutions. So if you want to work in a Thai school, you probably have more opportunities in Thailand than in surrounding countries, for example, Vietnam. There's always a demand. The pay isn't great, but you're earning 3 or 4 times more than your Thai colleagues. So by Thai standards, you'd be getting a good salary. You have the opportunity to live in different parts of Thailand. As we know, people are very hospitable. So certainly, as you said, is it a stopgap? Well, yeah, it probably is, because you don't really have opportunities for promotion. But it is a great place to get experience. So it would be a good first step or even a sideways step for some teachers. And then you've got international schools. And as you know, I mean, Thailand has more international schools than almost any other country on earth. I mean, it's changed a little bit in recent years with China and, Dubai, but it's still around 90 international schools, I believe. So,
wow.
And most of those follow a British, American, IB curriculum. So they are, they're generally good quality schools, and they do offer career progression. And the experience is recognized in your home country. So, so I would say that is definitely an option if you have the right qualifications. As you probably know, English language teaching is probably even, less of an option than before. I'd say there's no real incentive towards quality in the ELT sector in Thailand.
Yeah,
and there are a number of reasons we could go into that. But so you're talking about different types of school. Yes, some of them are a better option than others.
Let's talk about the salaries. I imagine if you were living in, Bangkok province, you could probably get by quite well on 50,000 baht a month. But if you're living in Bangkok, that's going to be sort of a bare minimum, I imagine. But if you're a fully qualified teacher working at an international school in Bangkok, your salary could be 150, 180, 200 plus thousand baht a month. So it really depends on where you are and what type of school you're in.
Well, it also depends how you live. I mean, if you can give up your aspects of your Farang lifestyle, you can live in Bangkok on on 20 or 30,000. It all depends, I suppose, to what extent you're, assimilated into the culture.
Right. Yeah. I think that's also what makes Bangkok such a great city too, is that you can live here with very little, or you can live here and blow through $10,000 a day if you want.
Yeah.
It just depends on the type of lifestyle you want.
The opportunity would be a fine thing. Yeah.
And looking at the same question from a different angle.
Yeah.
So to employers back home, in your home country, working at Somchai school in some no-name province that they never heard of probably does not carry the same weight of experience as if you worked at XYZ International School in Bangkok. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's a little bit like, students taking a gap year. It's a productive way to spend a gap year. You could certainly argue that it's helped you develop as a teacher, but you're not really going to have the evidence on paper that you would get at an international school.
Right. So from the students' perspective, then, have you seen a change in how students perceive foreign teachers?
I think that despite all the challenges there are in the education system, the younger generation is learning to speak English almost despite itself, or at least to understand English. It's part of globalization, I suppose, and they don't have this sort of fear of foreigners. They're sort of interested in foreigners. I mean, I think they always were, but maybe there's less of the fear factor. But there's also a lot of schools now that have these English programs. So the kids may not have great English, but their receptive skills are improving. They're getting taught a number of subjects, not just English language, but they might be being taught maths in English and geography in English. So it's their exposure in school and outside school with YouTube, Instagram, and so on is much, much more than it used to be.
I think that's a massive sort of well of gravity in terms of how younger kids grow up and perceive foreigners in other countries. When I got here, none of that stuff existed. And so, it was most kids, the only interaction they had with foreigners was, watching them from afar at the mall or in school. Mm-hmm. Now, they've probably got subscriptions to 50 foreign channels. There's all these Thai teachers online who teach English to kids. There's a hell of a lot more opportunity for exposure than there used to be. Yeah,
and I'd say generally, it's a good thing. There are downsides, as we know, with social media, but in terms of openness and in terms of engaging people, opening up their minds to different cultures, I think it's got to be a good thing.
I remember, I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I first started, I was teaching at an all-girls high school, Thai all-girls high school. And when I first started, I have a goatee, and one of the older teachers kind of pulled me aside and very politely asked, like, hey, do you think maybe you could shave that goatee off? Because some of the girls might be a little bit scared of that, because Thai men don't have a lot of facial hair.
Did you shave it?
No, man. This is all I got to work with. I don't have any hair on my head, so this is what... So I basically said, I said, no, I'm not going to shave it. And my thought was that, look, if the Chinese 70-year-old music teacher guy can have a 4-foot long hair grown out of the mole on his chin, they're not gonna be worried about that, and they weren't. And I had a great relationship with my students. That being said, many months later, I was sitting on the floor with some of my students going over a script for something we were doing. And one of them was sitting beside me, and she petted my arm, which, like, I got hair on my arm, and she petted my arm like it was a dog. And she said, monkey. So there was still some curiosity there that is just sort of hard to, I don't think any amount of YouTube will erase that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Monkey. So are the days then of doing it like I did it, just showing up and working somewhere / anywhere, are those days over now?
I don't know. I think personality goes a long way. I don't think they'll necessarily go and pick you out off the street because you look foreign. But I think schools often need teachers. Like you might, if you have a background in geography and they need a geography teacher, they may want to take you on by sheer force of personality and the fact that you can do a job. It's not the Wild West like it used to be in terms of, but then a lot of things, as we know, have changed in Thailand. It's not just education that's changed. I think society has changed.
And I think one thing that's changed a lot, like if I'm a person and I want to come to Asia to teach English, and I look at, say, Japan versus Thailand, why would I choose Thailand? Teachers in Japan get paid a ton more money. They're probably offered similar or more greater level of respect in Japanese culture. I don't know, but it seems to me that one problem with the Thai education system here is they want Japanese results for Thai salaries.
Absolutely, and even more so from their own teachers, who they pay a pittance. So, I mean, in answer to your question, why would you choose Thailand over Japan? Well, you probably wouldn't. I had a friend actually who married a Japanese woman, and he said to me after he'd spent some time in Thailand, he said, in Japan, you are fully respected legally, right? But you're never really accepted into the family. And I think in Thailand, it's the reverse. In Thailand, even without speaking the language, as you probably know, once you're in a Thai family, you're accepted. Keep talking about it being, the land of smiles. I think it is to a great extent. It is still the land of smiles. I think it's a great choice in terms of livability, right? But if you're talking about career progression, you work in Japan, you can have a long-term work visa, stable contract, career progression, and that's just as an English language teacher. So, and you don't really get any of that in Thailand. So I suppose it depends what you're looking for.
Yeah. I think the part of the old school teaching English in Thailand was that, you could show up to the classroom during the week, and on the weekends you could take off to Kosamet and party or something like that. So that was obviously a huge pull for a lot of people, which might not be that big of a pull for maybe older people who want to come here and set up a real career goal or career stepping stone, So
yeah, I think you probably get more people now who come over to Thailand with a nest egg, so they coming here for the money is a bad idea. But there are still a whole load of reasons why you might want to live in Thailand.
What when you look back at yourself when you first came over here, and sort of earlier in your career, is there any advice you would give yourself, knowing what you know now? Like, what would you do differently if you were coming over here now as a teacher?
Well, as I said, I didn't really come over as a teacher. I probably would have moved to the British Council sooner, and I probably would have got out of it sooner and moved, in a different direction. You mentioned inertia, but I think we all have a sort of inertia, which and comfort zones. And so I think when you look back at your life up to now, you always think, well, why did I stay so long doing what I was doing? And I think it's never too late to change career or to change direction. And so I've done that in my life. So probably the only thing I'd change would be to do it earlier.
So as we're wrapping up, what we like to do is we give a heads up to some of our $5 and above patrons, and they can ask questions of our guests. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of questions here from one of our listeners named Jet. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to know, is ageism against teachers a thing here? Like, if you're 30, do you get treated the same way as a 60-year-old? or vice versa?
I think that's a great question, because I'd say in many ways it's the reverse. You get a lot of respect as, for seniority here. So there's an assumption. I mean, I remember I taught teenagers in Spain and in Venezuela, in Ukraine as well, in the UK, many places. And the first time I taught teenagers in Thailand, I was just amazed at how easy it was, because, above a certain age, there's an instant respect. Of course, you can lose that respect. It's quite easy to lose it, but I think you start off with that, and so that is a real positive. Of course, they're not going to have the same, a different sort of fascination. If you're 30 years old and handsome, or pretty, or whatever, they're going to be
sure
interested in you just the way kids at home are fascinated by younger teachers. But I think if anything, the ageism goes in reverse here. There's a respect for seniority that I don't know about Canada, but you certainly don't have that in the UK.
And one last question from Jet. He also raises a very interesting, this is probably a whole podcast on itself, but are non-white native speakers discriminated against, not just in Thailand, but in Asia, in your experience? Because I remember teaching with friends who came over here from Canada who were Chinese Canadian. And some parents were quite like, hey, we'd like a farang, like a white-skinned farang. Even though this person, my friend who came over here, was much more qualified than I was and spoke with a native accent just like I did, but it was about how she looked. Have you ever seen anything like that?
Unfortunately, I think it's still the case. I think it's less so than in the past, and we can thank social media. We thank the sort of internationalization of music and movies and so on for that. I think, as when kids see a sort of a black or brown face as their teacher, any sort of negativity they may have had can disappear in seconds. It's a question of friendliness and empathy with your students. And the reality is, of course, Thailand is pretty homogeneous as a country. So until that changes, you can't expect. It's not just the color of your skin, as you found with your goatee. It could be the way you look. So yeah, I think there's still a long way to go here. Absolutely.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I think Thailand is a country of baby steps in almost every element, right? It is getting better, but not in leaps and bounds. It's baby steps, because there's a status quo here, and people love the status quo.
Yes, they do. And yeah. That's another podcast.
It is. So as we're finishing up, then let's talk about the elephant in the room. The Thai education system gets a lot of flack, gets a lot of criticism. I think most of it deserved. My takeaway is that I think everyone knows what needs to be done to improve the Thai education system, but because it's so entrenched and there's so many people just really like how things are done now. There's a lot of people making money and a lot of people enjoying the fruits of how the system is set up. They don't want it to change. They say, oh yeah, this is what needs to be done. But secretly they're like, but don't change it. What do you think about this?
Well, perhaps there's another elephant in the room, and the other elephant is the 90% of employees, i.e. the teachers in the Thai education system, who earn, 10,000 odd a month. Not enough to live on. So, corruption is almost inevitable at the low level. And the only way I think you can change things, so you can be talking about, I agree with you. There are a whole load of questions. The Thai education system in many ways is dysfunctional. It's not preparing students for the 20th century, let alone the 21st century, in terms of thinking skills and language skills and so on.
Yeah, they talk a big game. They say like, "Oh, we want critical thinking skills," but when students actually try to think critically, they just get snapped back into their seat.
And to change that, you have to take a long-term view of it, and you need to pay the teachers more if you want to change the way they teach, and if you want to train them up. Training this is something I have direct experience of. Training in Thailand, a lot of the time it's about turning up and getting your photo taken. So, one of the things I started doing in training sessions was refusing to allow any photos until the end, because that way they had to stay. Otherwise, the teacher, and I don't blame the teachers, they were there to get the certificate to show that they'd attended a training. They weren't really interested in changing the way they teach. And that's sort of inevitable with their earnings. The only way for them to supplement those earnings is through, making sure they don't teach what the students need for the exams, and then give extra classes to plug the gap.
It's like the guys who build the sidewalks and then build them in such a way that they're going to be called back to fix the sidewalks in 6 months.
Like the builders in 40 Towers, that sort of thing.
Right.
So it's I mean, you're right. It's a massive project. I'm not sure that the majority of people in Thailand do know that it needs to change. We're all products of the culture we come from, and if you speak to people from most countries, they probably think the education system in their country is fine because they're products of it. So it's only when you sort of compare things, internationally, and you see, maybe they could do things differently.
Right. Well, I think the internet is helping with that too, right? A lot of kids are seeing what's going on.
So maybe, I say maybe things will change, but I think, as you say, it's a massive project that they need to undertake, and it would need the political will.
Right. You see this in Nordic countries where teachers are paid very high salaries, and kids grow up aspiring to be a teacher because it's a prestigious, well-paid job, and they seem to be doing okay over there. So maybe that's what we need.
It's all. I think it's a lot of it is. I'm sure from what you said as a teacher, if you're able to teach in a fun way, you're probably capable of encouraging thinking skills, incorporating, mixing different subject areas, and bringing global skills into the classroom. All things that they're not really rocket science, but if you have absolutely zero incentive to change the way you teach, you're not going to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, David, thank you for your time, man. That was very interesting, and some good insights there. So listeners, if you are thinking of coming to Thailand as a teacher when all of this COVID nonsense dies down, there's a lot of stuff to think about. Yeah, but it can be done, and you can have a hell of a time doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, David, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Greg. It was great to meet you.
Dude, this is a great topic. The irony is, even though I've been teaching in Thailand for 21 years, I really don't know much about teaching English. So I've never worked as an English teacher. So I kind of feel like my career here has been kind of adjacent to this, but I don't really know that much about it. So I think the interview is quite helpful. And I think for a young person, especially, teaching English it's just an obvious potential path to living here for a while. Right.
Yeah, I really, like I said in the interview, I really think there's sort of like a strata of teaching English. And what I did, I can barely call myself a teacher. I was basically a hired foreigner who came in and taught his kids how to speak slang, so the parents could say that my daughter is taught by a real Farang, a real live Farang,
Right.
I don't know if I'd call myself a teacher But, you know, there are people that have the qualifications and the degrees, and they put a lot of work and time into it, which I did not do.
For sure.
So, yeah, it's an interesting thing because still so many people come here to do that. And it can be a bit of a complex thing to get into with different paths and nuances and outcomes. So, yeah, it's a cool topic. And much like you, it's been 20 years since I did it. I have zero insight into that industry anymore.
Yeah, another weird thing is apparently China, like they cracked down on or made illegal tutoring or teaching outside of the formal school system. So I've read that there's been an exodus of English teachers from China. I wonder if more of them will try to come here.
Yeah, I don't know. We really didn't get into that in a big way, but that's kind of an opaque issue again. Like, all teachers in China? What if you're really qualified? What if you're working at a big school? You know, I think they just cracked down on sort of like the fly by night guys like myself, who were sort of in the informal sector or.
Well, again, this might even be worth another show, but it's. I think it was a pretty severe crackdown on all kinds of tutoring schools outside of the education system, because I think it's just the government there wants control over what people learn, and they don't want students going to more classes after school, which is it's almost a universally Asian thing. I've noticed this in Thailand and throughout Asia. It's very common for kids to go to school all day and then they go to cram schools afterwards.
Right.
You know, which I could see myself being opposed to that for different reasons, but my guessing is the Chinese government's opposed to it because they can't control what people are learning, you know, in these private institutes, right?
Right, they're getting access to all these crazy Western ideas.
That's right. But anyway, it's just a interesting question. I wonder if there's going to be more English teachers here because of that, or more competition. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, anyway, thanks to David for coming on and talking about that. It's an interesting discussion. And I know a lot of our listeners have been, are, or want to be teachers. So I hope you got some information out of that. And drop us a line and let us know how you're doing.
Yeah, you know, I like this maybe even being a recurring series. I know we have a bunch of them already, but it's just, we have addressed this issue before, but I think an ongoing series on teaching English in Thailand, it could be useful to our listeners. What do you think?
It might be, yeah. I mean, in season 2, we did an interview with Sheila, who was the wife of then co-host Evo, and she was a qualified teacher at an international school.
Right,
so
I remember.
We talked with her about the quote-unquote real teachers.
Right.
So that was an interesting show.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll follow up on this later.
Yeah. So thanks, David. That was cool to talk to you. All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. Last time, I asked Ed if he liked sugar in noodles. So this week, Ed, it's all on you.
Well, my question is slightly more serious than sugar in noodles.
Nothing is more serious than sugar in noodles.
This just popped in my head because I was recently working on a lecture for my students, like and ethics, dealing with ethics, and dude, you're gonna laugh when you hear how serious this question is.
Okay.
What's your take? I think this is I love the topic. I love the issue. What's your take on the fact that Thailand does not euthanize dogs?
Damn, dude, that's a pretty hard right turn from
sugar and noodles, euthanizing dogs. Come on, they're really the same thing.
Closely related.
No, I remember I remember when I first got here, and there's all these street dogs all over the place, and then somewhere I read or heard, oh yeah, they don't euthanize dogs, and I was shocked. I mean, I'm not in favor of randomly killing animals. I'm not in favor of that. But at least in the States, it's very common that dogs do get euthanized in different situations. And so do you just look at it as like, wow, Thai people are just more compassionate? I wish Canada and the U.S. were the same way, or do you think maybe it's too compassionate or maybe a bit silly because there is a street dog problem?
It's a very interesting topic because I remember years ago I learned that it is really difficult if you have a very sick dog, say someone's dying of cancer or something, it's very hard to find a vet who will put them down, because that's not it's not in line with a lot of Buddhist beliefs or how a lot of people interpret those beliefs. So it's something that you just don't think about in the West. Like, I think a lot of us who come from Western culture have the idea, like, if someone is suffering, if an animal is suffering, it's very fine and even moral to put it out of its misery.
That's right.
To end the suffering, and that then extends to the whole right to life, right to die thing for humans as well. But it's an interesting quirk in Thailand where you have a ton of stray dogs, and even if you see them on the road and they're obviously, they got broken, poorly healed legs or extreme mange, and they're obviously suffering from open wounds and stuff, they just sort of let them be there until they eventually die, which, this is an interesting question, because now I'm sort of being forced to to put my moral stance on the spot.
I've got an answer, but it is kind of I have a kind of half and half answer. So, but I asked you first, so those are the rules.
My thing is, I don't know if I can love, loathe, or leave it, but I don't agree with it. I think
you don't agree with the Thai way, or you don't agree with the Western way?
I don't agree with letting an animal continue to suffer until it dies. I think if you have the option, I think it's probably the best way, if an unpleasant way, to put it out of its misery. So I think it's an unfortunate reality. I don't necessarily agree with it. In cases where there's no other alternative, I think it's probably the right thing to do. So I would say I disagree with this policy in Thailand.
Okay, interesting, because to me, there's two different cases that need to be distinguished. One case is, I think back home, I think that stray dogs and unclaimed dogs that aren't claimed after a while, I think they are euthanized. I think so. Even dogs that aren't sick or old, I believe so. And so that I'm opposed to. So I love the fact that Thailand does not just catch stray dogs and euthanize them if they're not claimed.
Okay, that's a bit of a different issue.
Right,
it's related,
you're right. You're right. So I love the fact that they don't do that, which I think it does happen back home. I think dogs do get euthanized that aren't claimed.
Right, because there's not a stray.
That's right.
Not a big stray dog problem.
So I think they catch strays, and I do think there's private groups or people that try to find owners, but I think if they don't find owners, I think they euthanize them.
I think so, and I mean, it's this is getting into the weeds here, but I think it's very unpleasant. But you just can't keep collecting dogs and keeping them and feeding them and
right. Well, what I'm saying is that I like the fact that Thai people will not euthanize them, but I'm with you on the other stuff. So I think when a dog is super old, suffering, very sick, whatever it is, or it's clear that they're not going to survive, in that case, I am in favor of euthanizing. So I guess I'm going to have to go with. I guess we're both tweeners on this. Like I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to go with live with. But I like the fact that they don't look at street dogs as things that must be exterminated
or dealt with. I think they sort of like leave them to their own. Like, okay, you go over there, and now you're a street dog, a soy dog.
Yeah, I mean, I wish they did a better job of. Every year they try to. We've talked about this before, but every year they try to sterilize a bunch of them to make sure they don't spread. But it's kind of a futile effort. But I do like the fact they don't just catch them and kill them. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's not fair. But I think if your dog is suffering, then and you are having a trouble finding someone to put it down, that's probably really stuck between a rock and a hard place thing. It's probably an unfortunate thing, but
agreed.
I just don't like seeing things suffer.
All right, deep thoughts with the Bangkok podcast. I'm just gonna have to go tweener here. I'm gonna have to go live with.
I'm going to, next week, I'm going to ask you a really lighthearted one because that was a heavy one. I'm going to swing from light to heavy to light. Hey, real quick, let's do a voicemail. We ask our listeners to send in a voicemail on the Line app if they have something to say. And this week we heard from our buddy and former guest, Matt Lucas, who sent us this.
And always look on the bright side of life. Do-do, 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 do-do. Always look on the light side of life. Do-do, do-do, do-do.
Well, I appreciate his positive attitude.
You got to have a positive attitude, man, especially these days.
For sure. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw this movie. That this is from Life of Brian, Monty Python, Life of Brian. And yeah, this was just an incredibly catchy song, and we thought it was brilliant, and we whistled it and sang it for years. So yeah, thanks, Matt. That was funny. And hey, we only played a few seconds of it, but if you're a real fan of Matt's singing listener, we'll play this after Ed and I sign off. We'll play it in its entirety, so you can listen to Matt's charming vocals.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
A final thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website and connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
Always, even if it kills us. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. Send us a voicemail online, like we said, that we'll feature on the show. Or you can even reach out to me directly on Twitter or Insta, where I am BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you back here next week.
For sure.
Some things in life are bad. They can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. And this'll help things turn out for the best. And always look on the bright side of life. Do-do, 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 do-do. Always look on the light side of life. Do-do, 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 do-do. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps. Just purse your lips and whistle, that's the thing. And always look on the bright side of life. Come on now. Do-do, 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 do-do. Always look on the right side of life. Do-do, 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 do-do.